Given the heading, Australia leader or laggard in the race to secure our future industries. I'm Jeff Connolly. I'm the Chair and CEO of the Siemens Group in the Pacific region. And I also, as mentioned by the Senator, currently the Chair of the Prime Minister's Industry 4.0 Task Force. At this point, I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of this land and their elders past and present. We support CEDA because it is really one of the few forums that facilitates open, bipartisan discussion on the strategic alternatives and priorities for the country's economic prosperity, the definition of CEDA's purpose. Siemens, as a German-owned multinational, has enjoyed being an integral part of business and society in Australia since 1872. So we're by no means newcomers. Our success in Australia is dependent on Australia's economic growth, which in our view is dependent on the ability to be internationally competitive. I, like most companies, compete for resources from boards. The more competitive Australia is, the more chance I've got to get additional attention on the Australian environment. So I'm vitally interested to make sure that our economy prospers as much as possible. I'm grateful to have been invited to facilitate the discussion on where we stand in preparing industries to be fit for competition in the future. By way of introductory remarks to set a scene, at previous CEDA events across Australia, I've talked about three major global themes. The ones that are profoundly shaping industries at a global level and therefore have a specific consequence for Australia. The first is Industry 4.0, where I've invested quite a lot of time. Starting off in its application to manufacturing industry, that's where the thing was conceived, originally from the German government and industry, but also how that has application in Australia's process industries. Senator Sinodinos and a couple of the comments previously were talking about the future of work. The Industry 4.0 topic is not one of purely technology. It's an holistic framework that the Germans have actually set in place to take account of the fact that there's a revolution occurring in industry. The digital revolution, the movement towards a cyber-physical world, and they've taken the view that we have to get, or they have to get their country organised for that. And interestingly enough, it is bipartisan, both sides of government, both sides of parliament in Germany. The unions, the research institutions, academia are contributing to that particular framework. And it might interest you to know that the future of work stream in the Industry 4.0 platform in Germany is actually led by the IG Metall, which is one of Germany's most prominent unions. And the framework that we're putting in place in Australia actually will see a similar contribution from organised labour. Because if you're going to talk about an industrial revolution, you better make sure that the organised labour is actually at the table and understanding the issue, and understanding what those jobs of the future look like and what the transition plan needs to be to move it forward in a meaningful way. Second of the topics I've spoken a lot about at CEDA is the idea of fully integrated intelligent infrastructure. We're spending a lot of money in Australia on infrastructure, but at the end, what we really are striving to achieve is an integrated real-time optimisation and incident management across all infrastructure domains. And this is no mean feat, but unless there's a long-term plan that lasts from government to government to government, then of course we will sell short that final aspiration. And the final one that I've been talking about at CEDA is the energy transformation. Here I of course call experience from our German friends who've had their Energiewende, and it hasn't all gone that well for them. But they're the first to admit that that energy transformation there's been a lot of learnings from, and this transition in Australia from fossil fuels to the transitional fuel of gas-fired generation into more sustainable, totally renewable energies is something that we have to facilitate. All of these themes have been underpinned by the explosion of data acquisition and meaningful digital intelligence, not just acquisition for its own sake, but doing something meaningful with that. I was interested in Germany recently to go to an analytics field for their train system, the very high-speed trains. real-time monitoring of each individual bearing on a high-speed train whilst it's running, to know that a particular bearing will fail in about 4 months' time, that particular bogie needs to be taken off the tracks. But it's actually monitoring real time. The same guys are actually saying the real reason that transport is delayed in Germany, the biggest single reason is that the doors don't open or close. And if you can't open and close doors on trains, then of course you can't get people on and off. And of course you have delays. So what are the predictive technologies, mathematical formulas using data to actually improve those outcomes? Sounds simple, but deeply rooted in the discussion we were having a few moments ago about math science and STEM skills and the importance of mathematicians in that future world. As digital is in the middle of this thing, I think it's safe to say that none of these themes should be seen as independent visions of the future, but rather they're interdependent. All those fields, those massive areas of expenditure, will depend on our ability to manage data better over the longer term. And of course, the digital world actually sees no boundaries. So for us as Australians to close our eyes to what's going on in the rest of the world would be actually possibly selling ourselves short. There's no need for us to pick up and copy-paste what's going on overseas, but certainly we need to go out and have a look, bring it back and put it in context for what we need to do. And there I would make a comment about vocational training, which is a topic that we just had. And this notion that apprenticeships have got this perhaps negative stigma attached to the word in Europe and particularly in Germany, where they've had 500 years of master and apprentice structure. A professional apprenticeship outcome will stand you very well in society. And some of the learnings from the German experience in vocational training is what we're trying to actually introduce into Industry 4.0 apprenticeships, and actually through Swinburne University, I think, with respect to all of the academic institutions in the room, one of the thought leaders in terms of bringing those TAFE courses up from what was blue collar, and I heard new collar, that was nice too, up from there, and actually considering undergraduate degrees that are more employment vocational outcome focus. So we need to watch that space. So, on to the panel. Our panels represent key institutions of Australia. Defence, it goes without saying that the target being reinforced by the President of the United States. If you're not spending 2% of GDP, you're not a friend anymore. So I guess, Alex, we're headed in that direction, if we're not quite there yet, but we're certainly heading in that direction. And it goes without saying that the defence industry, including the multiplier effects with that amount of spending, will drive a lot of economic development potential for Australia. I, for one, have never conceded, Elizabeth, that Australia's mining boom is over. We have a natural resource endowment which now moves to an exciting technology innovation dependent stage, which promises to enable the economic viability of projects that were previously not viable. So there is lots of potential in that area, and for any of the leaders in Australia to talk down mining and the mining industry, I think would be quite counterproductive. And of course, as I mentioned, digitalisation, Adrian, in a field of connected, autonomously controlled equipment, there's a need for us to get a hold of the topic of cybersecurity. Innovative mastery secures us locally, as the Senator was mentioning. It's only for our own capability, but it also reflects the potential to develop skills that we can export. So I don't disagree with the agenda talking about innovation and science, and perhaps it's up to the leadership of the country to get out there and sell it a little better and make sure that there's something in it for everyone. I was talking to Elizabeth as we moved up onto the stage, and she said, you know, Jeff, I'm sick and tired of hearing myself talking about what's the purpose of a growth centre because we've said it and said it and said it. But I'll start on that note, Elizabeth, and ask you what's the purpose of a growth centre?
I suppose I have to say thank you, Jeff. Yeah, look, I think there's probably 4 key points and 4 key outcomes that a growth centre is looking for, and that's jobs, investment, capability and exports. Really, that's what the government's looking for us to achieve. How do we do that? Well, there have been 6 growth centres established in areas where the government believes that we can grow those particular outcomes. And we're tasked with the process, I suppose, of developing a strategy for the industry, and given 4 particular objectives for us to focus on, and they are collaboration and commercialisation, global supply chain, management skills and workforce capability, and also deregulation are the 4 key areas we're asked to look at. So each of the growth centres is established around the country. The other areas are Adrian's area in cybersecurity. We've got Sue McClellan here from MedTech and Pharmaceutical, Advanced Manufacturing, Mine, which is mining equipment, technology and services, Food and Agriculture, and Oil and Gas. So all industries of different sizes and different opportunities, some of them quite significant and established, and some very emerging, like the one that Adrian is working in. The exciting thing about this program, and this part of the program talks to industry policy, I think it's a very clever structure, a very wise structure. It's about playing to our strengths. I run my own company, and I wouldn't spend my time in my company working on things that I'm not particularly competitive at. So I think as a government, it's important as a platform for industry policy that we are playing to the strengths where we can grow jobs, investment capability and exports. So I think they've identified some very positive areas. The other part of the Growth Centre program, which is also really clever, is that they've brought together then other parts of government to work with the growth centres, and that could be the CSIRO, the Entrepreneurs Program, the ARC funding and the Industrial Transformation Research Pathways, are all areas that we as growth centres can tap into to link the industry together. The funding model is we get $20 million over 4 years. So, and then obviously, I suppose, part of our passion is, when we look at some of the other policy models like this overseas, for example, in the UK with the Catapult program, which is on along similar lines, they've got a 10-year horizon. So I suppose, we're looking at achieving a lot in 4 years, and I think, Adrian and myself and the other growth centres certainly would be very keen in a policy sense to see that horizon pushed out further forward.
The original 4-year seems today with the progress to be a little short.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
And if we at some point have a change of government, then how would we ensure that that carries forward?
Well, of course, it would be fantastic to have bipartisan support for this program. I don't think we're quite there yet, and I think it's a really critical part. We all know in Australia that industry policy is affected by the fact that we have relatively short time frames. And when you're trying to create real change in an industry, it's more than a 4-year horizon. We're looking at 10 to 20-year horizons really to make sure that there is sustainable and substantial quality change in the industry.
How would you see the life of the government-guided growth centre, Adrian, from the cybersecurity point of view?
So I guess to answer that, probably just to provide a little bit of context for why cyber is so critical right now. So if you look at Australia and where Australia is at, we've had, and the Minister alluded to it, growth in GNI through structural reform and then terms of trade growth. The only way that we grow as an economy is either creation of new industry, or if you look at the structure, we've got 2 million registered businesses in Australia. The majority of which are small businesses, less than 20 people. In fact, 98% are small business. And so you got to ask, how does that happen? Like, how do we create that growth? So the new industries are going to be, we think, at Data61 and working together with other parts of CSIRO, underpinned by science and technology, but it's going to be an engineering breakthrough. So if you think what Tesla's done around renewable energy, it's the engineering breakthrough around batteries. If you look at what Musk is doing with SpaceX, it's the autonomous software to land the rocket that takes 99% of the cost out of putting something up into space. So you need both. So we need to create new industry on the one hand. It's going to be the convergence of IT, probably biology and materials together over the next 15 to 20 years. Then when you come to small business, we've got to have more of these small businesses become big businesses. And that's really where I think the Growth Centre can play, or the Growth Centre program can play a critical role. And in order to do that, increasingly to plug into global value chains, there's going to be a higher bar around security. Our companies are going to have to think about information and data supply chains in the way that they've thought about physical supply chains in the past. Statistically today, if a small business gets hit, 60% of them are gone inside of 6 months. So that sounds doom and gloom, but the flip side is that it's an enormous market. It's going to be a $220 billion global market, and we actually have the raw ingredients nationally to go after it.
I guess none of us need a reminder at that recent ransomware attack that the world experienced to underline we need it for our own security, but actually there is an industry emerging. What do you think, and the growth centres predominantly were set up to be areas of economic growth coming from an era of existing comparative advantage. What is our existing comparative advantage there, and why should we be better than everybody else?
For me?
Yeah, Adrian, sorry.
Okay, so if you look at cyber, it's not that we don't have capability, we do. So in fact, in terms of idea creation and IP generation, around particularly network security, we're actually the 4th largest holder of patents in the world of any country, but we've just failed so far to translate that into a vibrant domestic industry. We have phenomenal universities that are doing great things. We have entrepreneurs that are building companies that already in the cyber domain are global, if you look at like a Nuix or a MailGuard. So what we think we've missed is the national framework or blueprint to drive alignment across those people that are doing great things and to amplify the things. And then to bring global context, because with all of these data-driven industries, including cyber, it's a race to scale.
Yeah.
So empirically, roughly 70% of the market value is captured by the leader. So what we have to do is to accelerate people with great ideas being able to translate that into global franchises.
I fully agree with that. I can see Elizabeth champing at the bit to contribute a bit there. Before I get on to DST Group, Elizabeth, you have tremendous experience with global value chains and tapping into them and commercialising. How do you see the challenge there?
Thanks, Jeff. Look, one of the things I just wanted to comment on quickly, because Adrian's talking about it, absolutely true. I know the research that's come out of other nations, Nesta in the UK, shows that 60% of new jobs are developed often from new businesses. So this developing the new businesses and the very energetic new economy is really important. And it's one of the reasons, I suppose, why some people say, well, we don't need to worry about the mining industry. It's an old industry. It's no longer going to be providing new jobs or new opportunities. Actually, I just really am keen to provide a snapshot of what the mining equipment technology and services sector is in terms of the size of the Australian economy and the opportunities that come in from new capabilities like this. I didn't know that statistic about Australia being the 4th largest in terms of patents in IT, but I mean the application of that capability into what is already a substantial sector is a really important opportunity. But a lot of people don't understand that in addition to the mining industry itself in Australia, the mining equipment technology and services sector in its own right is an $86 billion industry. And that's grown over the last decade, doubled pretty much from a $44 billion industry. So it peaked over $100 billion, but it is still doubled over the last decade. And it's not an industry of old technologies, it's an industry of brand new technologies. It's an industry where Australia is world's best. Amongst the top 4 nations in the world in terms of innovation leadership. We're a startup nation. We've got probably the fastest startup capability in Australia in the METS industry, perhaps with the exception of China in this area. So it's a really exciting area of Australian economic growth and opportunity when we plug in other capabilities, and we are substantial exporters in our sector as well. Interestingly enough, of the $86 billion, $16 billion is in manufacturing. That compares to the automotive industry at $9 billion. So, let's focus on where we have a global competitive advantage, invest our capability. This is a sector that we can continue to grow, where we have really substantial competitive advantage. Having said that, we've got some areas that we need to address. We've got increased competition from overseas. We've got digitalisation. We've got a culture that is within the mining ecosystem that is transactional, not transformative. These are all opportunities. So it's a challenging sector, but it's a really exciting sector for Australia for us to work on and develop and grow substantially.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, the whole idea that to be in Australia for Australia won't cut it in the future. We have to be in Australia and competitive for the world, because there's two-way traffic happening. We're open to people coming in, and we absolutely must be competitive on a global stage. Not surprisingly, there's a session later today where I know Stephanie Fay from Austrade. I can't see her at the minute. There she is up the back there. So maybe you need to be taking us to the world a bit more with a bit more help from us, Stephanie. Alex,
Yes.
The title of today's session is "Are we leaders or laggards?"
Oh.
in future industries. I wonder, from the defence industry's point of view, how do you see that? Are we leading or are we falling behind?
It's an interesting question. So I think when we hear my colleagues on the panel here, we're leaders in mining and maybe possibly laggards a little bit in the cyber area. But so it's really you just couldn't categorise Australia as a leader or a laggard. I think in some sectors we lead, in others we lag. But I think the key is to leverage technologies. In the mining sector, the automation technologies, robotics technologies are world leading. We should be leveraging those into other areas such as agriculture, other maybe primary industries, where Australia does really well. So, and I think we would be looking to leverage some of those investments into defence. But for defence, you mentioned the 2% GDP. One of the powerful things I think that happened in the last couple of years that may have been not noticed is that there was a white paper produced, a defence white paper in 2016. That white paper has bipartisan support. And we have a program that's going to go out for the next 15, 20 years. Australia will spend $195 billion on new defence capabilities, including $80 billion on shipbuilding and submarines. These are very big national endeavours, and to do that, you should, I think the points that Elizabeth made about the growth sector absolutely apply to defence industry. We want to create jobs, you want to create growth, you want to create export opportunities and national capability. And you wouldn't want to build, our shipbuilding industries in the past have been stop and starts, have been very much a tendering approach where you say, look, build me 4 frigates and then we stop. Here we're going to have a continuous building program, which means you can get to global best practices and think about what you can export. I think what we need to make sure is people don't think that Australia is going to be building and exporting submarines or ships. The bending metal is actually the low end technology in shipbuilding. The high end is in the combat systems, radar systems, etc. And Australia is a world leader in some of these areas. There's a company here in Canberra called CA Technologies, which provides the world's best radars for navies, for Australian Navy, and will be exporting. That's what we have to be thinking about. It's not the big ship that we'll be exporting. We'll build them for ourselves, but there'll be component technologies which can be exported and locking us into global supply chains, and that's the key. I think there's a great example with everyone's probably thinking about the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. Australia's purchasing 75 of those. Previously, we used to have this offsets program where the manufacturer would have to spend so many million dollars on Australian local jobs. The business model's been inverted for that program, and Australian companies are being built into the global supply chain. So while we're only going to procure 75 F-35s initially, there's going to be close to 4,000 of these built around the world. And there's Australian companies like Quickstep will be exporting to the entire program. That's how we should be thinking about our companies, our small businesses. Yes, we can create global platforms, as Adrian alerted to, but also integrating small business into global businesses.
Absolutely. I mean, I spoke often during the process of the submarine competitive evaluation process about the potential for Australian small medium enterprises to be using the global engineering collaboration tools, the same ones that the US Navy use, or the same ones that NASA use, the same ones that Boeing use, that if we're in there engineering on those tools, post our own projects, we actually have an export capability because we're using those platforms that those large value chains globally use to procure and engineer their products. And I know Jens Gernemann from the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre won't mind me saying that manufacturing, by definition of the future, will have a much bigger design content. It's a much bigger engineering content than actual physical material content and the final cost of the goods. So we need to be stepping up our engineering capability. Alex, I wonder if you could just perhaps give us a comment on collaboration. During the previous process, we've worked together, and interestingly enough, we were looking to do research on the successor of the Collins-class submarine propulsion systems. And the question is, should a company go it alone? Should a country go it alone? Should defence go it alone? And we came to a nice conclusion on propulsion systems. So how do you see that emerging collaboration in the R&D field for defence?
Certainly. Well, the way Minister Sinodinos talked about it was exactly how we're working. It's a collaboration between academia, industry and defence. So defence may lead, industry will deliver, but we want to integrate the innovation coming out of academia. And that particular partnership you talked about there was about superconductors, and QUT has got a great laboratory. Siemens has got some great new technologies emerging in that area, and we've got a need. So we've been integrating a demonstration that could actually end up providing, powering our future submarines. And ultimately, again, going back to the point, I would hope that we not only create a capability for Australia, but ultimately export opportunities.
And build those relationships on a much broader
Absolutely.
scale. And global research programs, typically the institutions are maybe not as important as the individual thought leader or preeminent thinker in a topic, as in QET in this case.
And look, the only other thing I should say, Jeff, is that to collaborate, you've got to put resources into it. And one of the things about the white paper is there's $1.6 billion over the next 10 years for collaboration with academia and industry. Very substantive programs. These are the first time defence has put money into programs which are at risk. Generally, when we put money into a program, it's to procure something, to get something, and you're getting 12 submarines and you know the price. Here we are putting money into innovation. We know that we want to get a rate of return on that, but it's not driven by a fixed return. We know that some projects may not succeed, others will, which is, I think, a really good step forward.
And having a continuous build helps you cast your mind further forward on the future. If I just go back, Adrian, just briefly into Cybersecurity Growth Centre, you talked about in the sector competitiveness plan some challenges. What are the major challenges in that plan? Do you want to perhaps elaborate on how you see those?
Yeah, look, one of the major challenges is we've got to think of it in terms of a system. So one is capital, and it's not just any capital, it's sophisticated risk capital. So the whole area of cybersecurity is technically intimidating, and there's only a small fraction of institutional investors around the world that feel comfortable investing. So what we've got to do is either tap into those globally, or we've got to create a mechanism or a group of people that can de-risk it by simplifying and explaining and making it less intimidating. The other challenge is the buyer community. So in Australia right now, particularly at the big end of town, a lot of the buyers are reluctant to buy from emerging cybersecurity companies, and that's a very different profile than, say, Israel, for example. So in Israel, when an Israeli company is expanding globally, they're doing it with a dozen reference accounts under their belt. And so we need to influence the buyer community, and we've got programs in place to do that. The other one is around skilling, so influencing curriculum within the university sector. And I've been meeting with a bunch of the universities and looking under the hood at their admissions and the growth. So the word's out and it's resonated. So students are absolutely picking up cyber. It's a growth area, and related fields too. So you think about like machine learning and analytics and things that you don't think of as pure play cyber that can be applied to cyber as well. And then it's even reaching further back into the school system. So take Israel again. I mean, every 14-year-old in school, there's mandatory cybersecurity training. And we're doing a bit of it. We sponsor a group called the Girls Programming Network. And There was an event that took place out at Sydney Uni, and my own daughter participated in this. 200 girls aged 10 to 14 doing cryptography coding on a Saturday, which is amazing, right? So it's a whole system, and then there's a policy dimension too. It's been published and publicised that come January there'll be mandatory breach disclosure, which is going to bring a sharper focus to what's going on in the cyber domain for companies in Australia.
And do you think we've got enough critical mass to move the cyber topic further forward, or are we going to look for other global collaborations to get that done?
So it absolutely has to be done with global context and global partnerships. Cyber is not one thing; it's 100 things. It's 100 different things. So getting very, very focused about where we have advantage. One of those areas is cyber physical systems. For the reasons that Elizabeth was talking about, we've got large-scale deployments of connected equipment, and we've got a core skills base that understands trustworthy systems. For example, inside of Data61, we've done, and we're coming to the tail end of it, a project with DARPA in the US and Boeing, where we've provided a secure microkernel for some of their, or initially one of their autonomous vehicles, unmanned helicopter. But on the heels of that and the success of that, now that software is going to get deployed into other autonomous systems. So we do have skills, and another area is around risk management and compliance. There's a strong consulting and services sector. There's no reason that we can't scale that globally.
And Elizabeth, the headwinds of the Mining Equipment Technology Services Growth Centre, what do you see as the biggest barrier?
The biggest barrier or opportunity?
Both.
Either. Well, I think, my passion, particularly is around culture and collaboration. I think our biggest barrier at the moment is cultural change and bringing together the key players in the mining ecosystem, who are the miners, the researchers, the METS industries, who are the suppliers, and also government. There's a lot of old ways that have been established over a long period of time about how people work together. There's been cycles in the mining industry, as I'm sure you'd all understand. When the mining boom's going up and there's not enough resources, the suppliers' prices go up because they don't have sufficient capability to deliver. And at the market gets to its peak, and the miners are feeling pretty cheesed off because they're paying extraordinary prices for everything. The industry comes down again, and the miners, the suppliers, their prices drop, and the miners are pretty cheesed off. So, in that end of the cycle, they're looking to cut off suppliers and to, make the industry, I suppose, more competitive. So it's quite a cycle in the mining industry, and what that's resulted in is really big procurement departments. For the mining industries, how do we cut our costs? How do we reduce our costs? And procurement does not equal innovation. Procurement means equal cost down on standardised products, not how do I bring something innovative new through my business. So I think there are some relatively easy to fix, and I'm seeing that very much now with the leaders of the mining industry. They are really, obviously, clearly seeing innovation as critical, and we're working together to make sure those pathways to innovation for both the researchers and the suppliers are a lot more effective and a lot more collaborative. So that's the sort of major, I would say, deterrent, and of course the challenges we have from global competitors, and the fact that as an industry we probably don't have the major integrators based in Australia, so we need to find different ways of engaging in those sort of key digital platforms, mainly to be competitive.
Great. Alex, any other thoughts on those themes before I throw to the audience for Q&A?
Certainly. I think there's a mountain of opportunity in defence at the moment, but the key barrier, I would say, is STEM skills. I think that's right across the whole economy. I think when I go into it, and people are really robbing Peter to pay Paul. We see people going into another sector, really people paying a premium for those skills. We have a supply issue. I am worried about the visa constraints about skilled, because that's how we've been filling some of our jobs in the sector. So I think there's going to be a crunch coming with STEM, which is really going to drive the competitiveness competitive aspects of this. Just to give one example where the whole thing has changed, you think about planes and things like that. They were just aeronautical platforms with some electronics in them. The new F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, 20 million lines of code on that platform. It's software with wings, and you really do need a skilled workforce to maintain it. And we don't have that yet.
Absolutely. Some very common themes. So I'll open to the audience if there's any questions you'd like to ask our panellists for the next 10 to 15 minutes. I can't see any hands shooting up there. So on the left-hand side, sorry.
Keith Besgrove from Energy Consumers Australia again. Alex, you mentioned CEA Technologies, which is a well-known local company. Can you give us a feel for perhaps one or two others that you think are also likely to be able to be a successful part of those global supply chains?
Okay, I think Quick Step is another company that's come out. There's also, the Minister talked about some of these spin-off companies out of the Deakin University Carbon Hub. I think sort of the composite technologies there, I think they'll have a lot of potential into the defence industries. So they're translating from the automotive industry into potentially defence-related industries. There are quite a number of small SMEs coming through in the autonomous systems area, small drone technologies. I think certainly the big, large platforms has been locked up in terms of the big primes. I can see Australian companies getting into the global supply chains with Boeing, Lockheed Martin. But also I do see that in the smaller platform areas, there's some very novel Australian technologies.
At the back there, thank you.
Jackie Kelly from Lutheran Services. My question's in that area around patents. I've been hearing some conversations recently about the extent to which patents can equally inhibit innovation in an industry as much as they, enhance the opportunity to commercialise technologies. And I'm just interested in the panel's view on that, particularly around the whole industry that builds up, the legal industry that builds up around the patenting and the potential inhibiting people who are also playing in that space who might come out with a better product, and some of the limitations that imposes on the industry and capacity to be innovative.
Thanks for the question. That's a really pertinent one and something that's very close to my heart. I was going to give you two comments, one from my own personal business perspective and another one from the Growth Centre. At my own company, we patent stuff, but it's never with a plan to defend it, quite frankly. It's with a plan to find partners, to show them that we've got something. But to be honest, it's new, it's first mover advantage. We're always wanting to be so far ahead that the patent really is a bit irrelevant, or that our knowledge is so far ahead. I think what I've seen as the Growth Centre chair is that the IP transfer issue in this country is just diabolical. And this is a problem, we see in the US, and it sounds like in Israel and other places, particularly public sector funded research organisations develop IP and they just want to get it out there. In Australia, to try and get patents and knowledge from public sector research organisations takes years, and we're in an industry where fast innovation wins. It's speed that wins now, not value. And, this is really a change of mind issue, and I don't know how we solve that. I think we need to have some really serious talks at a senior government level about how we change thinking. And I think, sadly, the Wi-Fi achievement, it was a problem because now everyone thinks they're going to get $400 million when they come up with a great idea and they want to hang on to it. But we need to transfer those ideas out as soon as possible. I don't have an answer.
Sorry. Alex, in defence, of course, the complexity of sovereign information, if you like, is different. How do you spin that in your field?
There's some things that, you have commercial and confidence, you have national secrets, like you keep your technologies safe. Sometimes we can't even export them or they're controlled for export. But nevertheless, we do value patents. I think Australia underperforms in that area, and when they So you get this knee-jerk reaction, oh, we need more patents, so people just go off and patent without really a strategy, which was what Elizabeth was alluding to. So you're going to use it to, bargain to leverage technology, or you're building up a portfolio around a particular area. I actually was at CSIRO when the Wi-Fi litigation occurred. I was one of the part of the team that did that. So it's really interesting. We started a company called Radiata, which actually had the first IP. It went very successful, and it was acquired by Cisco. And then from there, the other industry took on. And then in the end, we said we wanted to defend our patent. This is a really good example of an organisation standing up for intellectual property. And we probably overall got $1 billion return from it, because Cisco bought Radiata for about 500 million, and we got about 500 million in royalty returns. So $1 billion outcome on a patent is not bad. But did we do well in the sense, did we actually leverage it to build Australian industry? No. And we did it in my organisation where I work today at DST. We invented the black box, and it's everywhere, but not built in Australia. So I think there are histories of Australians inventing things, protecting it to a certain degree, but not getting the full commercial exploitation, which is what you're talking about, I think. Yeah.
I completely agree with that. It's so we have creative, intelligent people that are as good or better than any others in the world, and we want to protect our ideas, but we don't want to overweight the value of the idea versus the translation of the idea to have an impact in creating an industry. And so it's a spectrum of overvalue, overweight the intellectual property, or undervalue and underweight it. The other dynamic that I think there was an allusion to in the question was around patents and the emergence of legal firms and others that exist purely to purchase and prosecute patents. My own personal view, and this is my personal view, is that those firms are corrosive for an innovation system. And where I see most effect, and you see this here in our organisation and also in others in the country and around the world, is if there's a new industry emerging, getting really strategic about where the choke points are going to be in that industry and where there's valuable intellectual property that can be created. But it's primarily for defence, not for offence.
Point. Got time for two more questions. One up on the right. Yep. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Matt Granger. I'm the CEO of an organisation called the Bunbury-Wellington Economic Alliance in the southwest of Western Australia. Just to more of a comment rather than a question. Just to effectively underscore what Elizabeth's comments are in relation to the mining equipment technology services sector, just how significant that component for a regional economy like our own is, and in relation to, I guess, recognition that the maintenance, supporting the sustainment of long-standing resource operations, for example, alumina refining, which is a major industry in our part of the world. There is tremendous local economic spin-off from those sorts of operations, and we're in discussion with our key major resource players, amongst others, in relation to a trade show effectively at the end of this year focused on local procurement. We're calling it Procurement Southwest. And interestingly, one of the comments from key players in the local resources industry is that they're very interested in the ag, the application of technology in the ag industry. So one of their comments is that the ag sector seems to be almost at the cutting edge, in a way, in the deployment of presumably the sort of technology related to precision agriculture. So I suppose from a growth centre perspective, it seems like there's desire for cross-pollination between the ag sector and I'm assuming the resource technology sector as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that comment. Just quickly to say that this is one of the great things about the METS industry is that it has a very strong regional focus, and in a survey that Ostmine did in 2013, 55% of the 860 companies surveyed actually export. So it's an extremely global-facing industry. But in terms of that transfer of technology into other industries, this is one of the things the mining industry can do for us. We have global majors in the mining industry operating in Australia, operating at the cutting edge of technology, bringing that technology into the mining industry, working with our local suppliers, and then that transfers into other industries. And our METS companies need to be diversified because it is a cyclical industry. So diversify into agriculture, diversify into defence. This is a really important part of the development of the industry as well. And you'll see, I think one of the reasons why the METS industry doesn't have a significant profile is that apart from Orica, which is our largest METS company with a turnover of $6 billion, a lot of the other major METS companies are diversified. They're in infrastructure, they're in construction, they're in oil and gas because they're in a cyclical industry. So that diversification piece is very important.
You raised the point on collaboration, and that's the theme for all the growth centres. If I can say on behalf of the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre, that's an enabling growth centre. And hopefully it's the how we do the manufacturing in each of the industries. I don't consider manufacturing an industry. It's an enabling capability across all industries. And that one is the transportable piece I see that we need to leverage. I have time for one more question. We're both pointing into the middle, so I'm not sure we're pointing at the same person. Up on the left, sorry.
Yeah, Peter Bailey. I'm the CEO for Arup. We're a global engineering design management planning consultancy. It's the same sort of theme as that previous question about how do we cross-fertilise. We've got a very large industry in Australia, which is the construction industry, which I believe is a laggard. And we haven't really ever explored information flow, modular construction, robotics, information modelling, predictive technologies. All those sort of things are absent from our construction industry, and we have one of the most expensive construction industries in the world. There's an $800 billion infrastructure construction shortfall in Australia and a far greater one to our north in Southeast Asia. It seems like a huge opportunity for us if we could only optimise our industry here. So how do we take the learnings from some of these other growth areas and put them into some of our existing large industries, because there's a huge opportunity for us?
Any takers on the panel?
So I can have a go at that. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. So just to back up in a bit of context around Data 61, which is relatively new but focused on digital and data disruption. There was a fork in the road about 15 months ago where Data 61, there was a discussion about Data 61's role for the country. And my belief and conviction and recommendation that I took to the CSIRO board was, because of what you're describing, Data 61 needs to be an integrated part of CSIRO, no question. And it's the intersection of digital and domain where Australia has an enormous opportunity, whether it's healthcare, personalised healthcare, whether it's precision agriculture that was mentioned, whether it's applying technology to energy at the core of energy. It's also fundamentally a data problem, but also to promote and provide bring a kind of network thinking or a platform mindset to collaborating with third parties. So I think we're an instrument inside of the country to try and catalyse and drive those sorts of conversations. I think the growth networks are also. And then you also see it further back in the value chain with the universities. And we, for example, we have a single collaboration agreement with 23 universities. We've got a third of Australia's ICT PhDs in network from all sorts of different disciplines. And that's going to go to 27 universities in the next weeks and 30 universities by September. And CSIRO more broadly has relationships into the universities as well. But I agree with you highlighting that as an opportunity. I think it is the opportunity for Australia.
Well, I think that you just highlighted an issue where I think the construction industry, like many, have no global aspirations for the industry. So the only way you're going to grow that industry is if it goes global and it has tools and technologies to offer. And I don't think I've previously worked in sort of related industries, and I've always found the construction wasn't really, it was a laggard in terms of not thinking about how you could integrate new technologies. A follower, not a leader. So you've got to change that mentality, and I think that's the key. But that requires possibly now whether the government should lead or the industry itself has to also stand up. Yeah.
Great comments to conclude the panel session. Can I ask you please to acknowledge the contribution of our experts, Adrian, Elizabeth and Alex.